Chapter 3: The Swift Horse, Black Dragon. Early the next day, I embarked on my journey to Dragon City. To avoid unnecessary trouble, I wore my bamboo hat again. Well, I couldn't help it, I'm just too handsome. The order and safety of the Dragon God Empire surpassed that of the Beastman Nation by far. After traveling for 5 days, I hadn't encountered a group of bandits. No wonder the Dragon God Empire could rival the other two great tribes. It indeed had its own advantages. The gradually warming air reminded me that it was already noon, and my stomach had run out of provisions. Conveniently, there was a small restaurant by the roadside ahead. Since arriving in the Dragon God Empire, I had become particularly fascinated by the local cuisine, which was a world apart from what I had experienced in the Beastman Nation. As I entered the restaurant, a fragrant aroma wafted over, making my appetite soar. Although the restaurant wasn't luxurious, it was very clean, and it seemed to be quite popular. About 60 to 70% of the seats were already occupied. I found a relatively quiet table by the side and sat down. A server came over, handed me the menu, and asked, "Sir, what would you like to order?" I flipped through the menu and randomly chose a few dishes I hadn't tried before, along with a pound of steamed buns. Soon, my dishes arrived. With a steamed bun in one hand and chopsticks in the other, I started my feast. As more time passed, the restaurant began to fill up. In no time, there wasn't an empty seat in the house. A young warrior walked in from outside. He was around 1.8 meters tall, dressed in moon-white warrior attire, looking sturdy and carrying a long sword on his back. He glanced around and saw that all the tables were taken. He walked over to my table and politely asked, "Big brother, there's no place left. Can I sit here with you?" I was seated at a 4-person table, all by myself. I nodded and continued eating with my head down. The warrior called out, "Waiter, bring me a pound of good wine, and 2 small dishes, plus a pound of steamed buns." Then he turned to me and said, "Big brother, you seem to be on a long journey." Although I hadn't taken off my bamboo hat, I had lifted the veil covering my face so that I could eat. Are all humans this friendly? I lifted my head, gave him a cold glance, and nodded slightly. He noticed my handsome yet cold expression and was taken aback. I continued eating my food without paying him any more attention. He had a bit of an awkward encounter, smiled sheepishly, and when his dishes arrived, I had already finished eating. I casually put down a silver coin, stood up, slung my bundle over my shoulder, and walked out of the restaurant. I noticed that many people in the Dragon God Empire were riding horses, and they were quite fast. I wanted to try riding one myself. It should help me reach Dragon City sooner. I stopped a passerby and asked, "Excuse me, where can I buy a horse around here?" The person I stopped frowned at first, probably because of my imposing stature, but then he pointed forward and said, "At the next intersection, turn left and walk about 2 kilometers. You'll find a stable there where you can buy horses." I nodded at him and headed in the direction he indicated. The stable was quite large, with a central racetrack covering around 1,000 acres, and on the left were areas for selling horses and related equipment. I reached the horse market and asked a horse dealer, "Which horses are for sale here?" The horse dealer could tell that I was an outsider and didn't know much about horses. He gave a disdainful smile and said, "As long as you can afford the price, any horse you see here is for sale." I nodded and began to look around, hoping to find a horse I liked. Suddenly, everyone started gathering towards the western part of the stable. I wasn't sure what was happening, so I quickly approached someone to inquire. It turned out that a few days ago, the owner of this stable had brought back a wild horse. This wild horse was extremely fierce, and no one had been able to tame it. They had even used a tranquilizer arrow to capture it in the first place. Today, the stable owner had invited several renowned horse trainers to try to tame it. I felt intrigued by this spirited horse. I followed the crowd to the western part of the stable. The area was already packed with people. Even though I was standing at the back, my height allowed me to see the center of the arena. I observed around 6 or 7 people surrounding a black stallion. Although I wasn't knowledgeable about horses, I could still sense its majesty. Its black coat shimmered like silk, glossy as black satin. It held its head high with pride, constantly snorting impatiently, exuding an air of hostility towards its surroundings. The sky began to cloud over as large clouds gathered overhead. Despite the lack of ample sunlight, I didn't feel cooler. In fact, it seemed even hotter. The people surrounding the horse tried to loop a rope around it and then mount it, but the black stallion was incredibly nimble. It dodged the trainer's attempts to mount it over and over. People around me started murmuring and speculating. Looks like it's going to fail again this time. I bet they won't be able to tame it. They never do. Just then, a middle-aged horse trainer unexpectedly released a loop from his hand and managed to slip it around the black horse's neck. The black stallion immediately grew agitated, rearing up on its hind legs and letting out a clear, resonant neigh. The horse trainer was quite skilled. He used the momentum to flip himself onto the horse's back and held on tightly to its neck. Great job, hold on, the surrounding crowd started applauding. The black horse kept bucking, trying to shake the trainer off its back. Its violent movements forced the other horse trainers around to retreat. Now, only the trainer on its back remained, battling it out alone. After a while, the black horse, still bucking, seemed to gradually calm down, stopping its kicking and becoming more docile. It seemed that even with its fiery spirit, it was destined to be tamed. The crowd cheered and shouted the trainer's name. It turned out he was the owner's son, and he raised his hands triumphantly while on the horse's back. Just then, something unexpected happened. The black horse suddenly collapsed as if its front legs had given way. The trainer was taken aback, quickly dismounting and rushing to examine it. A moment later, the horse unexpectedly stood back up. Using its front hooves for support, it kicked powerfully with its hind legs, striking the middle-aged horse trainer's chest. Even though I was quite far away, I could still hear the sound of his ribs breaking. He emitted a long, anguished scream as he was sent flying a great distance. Clearly, he wouldn't survive this. In reality, this sequence of events took only a few blinks of an eye. Chaos erupted among the crowd. The other horse trainers hurried to carry the injured man aside. A lavishly dressed individual rushed out from the sidelines, shouting in sorrow and rage, "Return my son's life to me. Kill this vicious horse." It seemed to be the owner of the stable, and his son's death had clearly clouded his judgment. Immediately, many of the stable's workers came running, brandishing weapons, ready to kill the horse. The black stallion still held its head high in defiance, oblivious to the impending doom. I don't know why, but I felt an unexplainable fondness for this spirited black horse from the moment I laid eyes on it. It seemed it was time for me to step in. I shouted loudly, "Hold on a moment." Using my strength, I pushed aside the people in front of me, advancing into the field. 1,000 pairs of eyes turned to look at me as I approached the stable owner, who was sobbing over his son's body. I first bowed my head to assess his son's injuries. He was already gone, blood streaming from all 7 openings of his head, and his chest had caved in. It was a gruesome sight. "Give me a chance. Let me tame this horse," I said. The stable owner, tears streaming down his face, said, "No, I want to use its corpse to mourn my son's spirit." I furrowed my brows and said coldly, "What has the horse done wrong? If you hadn't attempted to tame it beyond your means, this wouldn't have happened." The stable owner exploded in anger, shouting, "Who are you? How dare you act recklessly here? Guards, get rid of him." I snorted disdainfully and ignored him, turning towards the black horse. A few stable workers came to surround me. I removed my bamboo hat and slung it over my back, my voice icy as I warned, "Don't force me to harm you." These workers didn't care about my warning. Instead, hearing my arrogant words, they rushed at me, about 4 or 5 grabbing onto me. But they weren't wielding weapons. It seemed like they wanted to beat me up to vent their frustration for their boss. Their skills were no match for me. With a powerful tug of my arms, I threw them all off. As they came at me again, I gave a cold snort and locked eyes with them, a menacing glare in my eyes. I yelled, "If you're looking for death, then come." I delivered a powerful punch into the ground, creating a loud bang and throwing up a cloud of dust, forming a crater about 1 meter deep and half a meter wide on the flat ground. I brushed off the dirt from my clothes, ignoring the terrified workers, and walked straight towards the black horse. The black horse must have sensed the danger, as it stared at me with wide eyes, continuously pawing at the ground with its left front hoof. I stopped 2 meters away from it, stood my ground, and smirked at it. With the strength to tear tigers and leopards apart, was I really afraid of a horse? Whether it understood my expression or not, it snorted angrily and reared up on its hind legs, then brought them down forcefully towards me. I lowered my waist, planted my feet, and raised both arms. In an instant, I caught hold of its descending hooves. The force was indeed strong, my arms were pushed backward, but I immediately countered with my own strength. The people around me exclaimed in surprise. Such incredible strength! He actually blocked the horse's kick. Did you see the crater he made just now? He's definitely a high-ranking warrior. Is he even human? Could a human possess such immense strength? Sorry, but I wasn't entirely human, at least not in terms of strength. With a forceful movement of my waist, I swung the black horse outward, causing it to tumble on the ground, letting out a pained cry as it rolled. After struggling for a moment, it managed to stand up again. I walked up to it once more, locking eyes with its gaze and speaking in a cold tone, convinced now? With your strength, you can't possibly contend with me. It seemed as though it understood my words, as it actually nodded its head, its large eyes looking pitifully at me. It slowly walked up to me, its big head rubbing against my chest. I gently patted its head, a rare smile appearing on my face. From now on, you'll be my best partner. How about I call you Black Dragon? The black horse let out a joyful neigh, indicating that it agreed with the name I gave it. I turned my head and shouted loudly, "Stable owner, I'm sorry, but I'm taking this horse." Disregarding their reactions, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a bag of gold coins, about 50 of them, and tossed it over. Then, I leaped onto the horse. After mounting, I realized that I hadn't ridden a horse before. After all, how could an orc ride a horse? But I decided to ignore it. I tightly gripped the horse's sides with my legs and held onto its long brown mane. Without needing my urging, Black Dragon swiftly galloped away. As we approached the fence, I struck it with my palm, shattering the top 2 bars. With a powerful leap, it jumped over the fence, carrying its inexperienced rider me away. The sky gradually began to drizzle, and even though my clothes were getting wet, the cool sensation made me feel surprisingly comfortable. This was my first time riding a horse, and initially, I was a bit anxious. But after a while, that feeling faded. Sitting on Black Dragon's back felt steady and only slightly bumpy. The surrounding scenery rushed past us like lightning from both sides. I leaned my body against Black Dragon, and I gradually discovered that if I leaned to the left, it would move left, and if I leaned to the right, it would go to the right. It was quite fun, and since I was only 16 years old, I was caught up in the enjoyment, forgetting about the direction we were heading. It wasn't until it started to get dark that I realized we had lost our way. The surroundings were dense forests, and luckily, we were on a path, otherwise, I wouldn't have known which way to go. Oh well, I decided to continue in this direction and find someone to ask for directions. And so, I continued to ride Black Dragon along the path for another 2 hours until I reached a town. I tugged on the horse's mane to slow it down, and as we entered the town, I dismounted. I noticed that my pants were soaked from Black Dragon's sweat. I patted its head affectionately before heading further into the town. The town was quite sizable, with a variety of shops lining the streets, exuding a lively atmosphere. Black Dragon followed me closely as I made my way. I found an inn, and a waiter hurried over to me, wearing a smile and saying, "Sir, why not stay at our inn? We offer well-equipped facilities, reasonable prices, and excellent service." I raised my hand impatiently to stop him from continuing. "Find me a place and take care of my horse," I said. The waiter looked at Black Dragon behind me and exclaimed sincerely, "You have an impressive horse there. But, why doesn't it have a saddle?" "A saddle? What's that?" I wondered silently to myself but didn't ask. Instead, I said, "Do you have any here? I was just thinking of getting one." "We don't have any here, but you see, there's a shop over there that specializes in saddles. You could go there." They have good quality at reasonable prices. Take me there. I want a complete set, I replied. The waiter looked hesitant and said, but I'm still on duty here. You see. I let out a cold laugh and tossed a silver coin to him, saying, are you still busy now? The waiter caught the coin and smiled, saying, not at all, not at all. Just a moment, please. With that, he ran back into the inn, presumably to inform the other staff, and then returned enthusiastically to lead me to the saddle shop. I spent 10 gold coins to outfit Black Dragon with the finest saddle, bridle, horseshoes, and other equipment. I didn't ask for a riding crop because I didn't think I needed one. With this outfit, Black Dragon looked even more majestic. The shop staff all praised it, but it's worth mentioning that, aside from me, Black Dragon didn't let anyone else approach it. I had to hold on to its head to allow the staff to help put on the equipment. I followed the inn's waiter to their stable and personally brushed Black Dragon, washing it down before feeding it some high-quality fodder. Then, I returned to the inn to rest. After a night's rest, I inquired about the direction to Dragon City and located my position on a map. I set off again, and fortunately, I hadn't gone in the wrong direction. Despite a slight deviation, I quickly corrected my course and was on the right track. Having a saddle made riding Black Dragon much more comfortable. I relaxed the reins and adjusted the direction, letting Black Dragon gallop freely. When there were no people around, it maintained a moderate speed. But whenever it spotted other horses, it would immediately accelerate, determined to overtake them. Horses really do have a competitive spirit. With Black Dragon, my speed increased exponentially. I covered a distance of 3,000 kilometers in just over 10 days. That was still because I was concerned for Black Dragon's stamina, otherwise, I could have traveled faster. Finally, I arrived at Dragon City. While it might not have been as towering as our Orc Empire's capital, it was still magnificent. The city walls stood at an impressive 8 zhang, all constructed from thick granite, adorned with carvings of various dragons. The Dragon God Empire's flag fluttered proudly atop the city walls. Perhaps due to being an inland city, the defenses seemed relatively lax, and I entered the city without being questioned. Dragon City was indeed expansive, much larger than our Orc Empire's capital. It took me 3 days to roughly explore the city. The Heavenly Academy was quite renowned here. I inquired casually and quickly learned its location. I first registered at the Heavenly Academy and was informed that the exams wouldn't start for over a month. Since I had plenty of time, I decided to settle down. There were several inns around the academy, and I chose a relatively clean one. In the mornings, I practiced the Heavenly Thunder armor technique for a bit, and in the afternoons, I roamed around with Black Dragon. Sometimes, I took it outside the city for a run. Otherwise, with its tendency to eat and sleep, it would grow fat. At night, I focused on intensively practicing my demonic heavenly art. In this enemy nation, it was best to achieve the strength of a fallen angel with both wings, as well as a powerful dark mage. Besides, with my identity exposed, I needed to have enough combat power to hold my ground. Over a month passed this way. Although I put in great effort, my demonic heavenly art only progressed to the late stages of the second layer. I was still far from transforming, as I needed to complete the third layer to achieve that. It seemed that impatience was futile. I could only wait until I entered the Heavenly Academy. After this month of life, I realized that there were numerous warriors and mages in Dragon City. While I hadn't fought any mages yet, I had encountered several mages wearing robes. I faintly sensed their dreadfulness. The warriors also seemed quite skilled. Indeed, this powerful nation was no joke. Though I had initially been confident, my observations during this period made me a bit uncertain. Within the Dragon God Empire, warriors were classified as apprentice warriors, junior warriors, intermediate warriors, advanced warriors, swordsmen, great swordsmen, earth knights, radiant knights, sword saints, and war gods, 10 ranks in total. Starting from swordsmen, there were upper, middle, and lower subdivisions. Mages were classified as apprentice mages, junior mages, intermediate mages, advanced mages, great mages, magic masters, grand magic masters, magic archmages, grand magic archmages, and holy magic archmages, another 10 ranks. Similarly, from Grand Magic Archmages onward, they were divided into upper, middle, and lower subdivisions. Based on my rough estimation, considering my current strength with a human body, I was at the level of a lower-level swordsman, though with my powerful body and extraordinary defense, I could likely be considered a lower-level great swordsman. An ordinary Dragon Knight was probably a middle-level Radiant Knight, excluding the dragon. The most common fallen angel would also be a lower-level Radiant Knight and a middle-level Dark Magic Master. When combined with Dark Magic and the dragon's power, they had a chance to compete. As for me, I was roughly equivalent to the strength of an ordinary Baiman, without transforming, which was barely comparable to a lower-level great swordsman. It seemed there was still quite a gap between me and them. No wonder we needed over 2,000 Baiman warriors and over 30 fallen angels to contend with just over 100 Dragon Knights. Tomorrow, the exams would begin. I wondered if I could successfully enter the Heavenly Academy. I must continue to strengthen myself, otherwise, the orc race would never have its day. With a nervous heart, I embarked on the final practice of demonic heavenly art before the exams. What I didn't know was that the Dragon God Empire had its own challenges. Although Dragon Knights were powerful, they didn't possess the innate strength that Baiman had. With a bit of cultivation, a Dragon Knight could participate in battle once they matured. However, cultivating a Dragon Knight was extremely difficult. The Empire invested countless resources and efforts to maintain around 100 of them. This was also why they refrained from rashly attacking the Orc and Beastman nations. Once their Dragon Knights were wiped out, they'd lose their advantage, leaving them vulnerable to the coalition of Orcs and Beastmen. I snapped out of my training, changed into a fresh warrior's attire, and after a hearty meal, I arrived at my destination, the Heavenly Academy. Upon reaching the Academy's entrance, I was taken aback. So many people, there must have been thousands, packed closely together. But wait, I remember the recruitment officer saying they would only admit 300 students. This meant that only 1 out of 10 would be selected. Holding the wooden plaque I received during registration labeled number 1, of course, since I registered over a month ago, I walked into the academy. The training ground was vast, with enough space to accommodate so many candidates, all discussing something. Perhaps they were speculating about the exam questions. A clear voice resonated, "Attention, all candidates here for the exam. Please quiet down and arrange yourselves in rows from east to west according to your number, 50 candidates per row." I looked around for the source of the voice, wondering who had such a powerful ability. I later learned that it was a magical broadcast using amplification magic stones that could magnify the voice by dozens or even hundreds of times. After a while, the candidates were properly arranged in rows according to the instructions. The same voice repeated, "Attention, all candidates here for the exam. Please quiet down and arrange yourselves in rows from east to west according to your number, 50 candidates per row." After 3 times of hearing this, the formation was finally established. I counted roughly, there were more than 60 rows, totaling over 3,000 people. Truly a one-in-10 selection process. The Heavenly Academy's reputation was well-deserved, as even getting into the exams was difficult. Almost all of the Dragon God Empire's generals were alumni of the 4 major academies, with the Dragon Knight's origin especially tied to them. Nowadays, Dragon Knights weren't just symbols of strength, they also represented honor and power. In the Dragon God Empire, Dragon Knights wielded considerable power, with even the lowest-ranking ones holding the title of Viscount. The top 3 marshals had the title of Duke due to their role as the pillars of the Empire. If a commoner wanted to become a noble, becoming a Dragon Knight was undoubtedly the best option, and the 4 major academies provided the most reliable platform for this. Alright, candidates, maintain a safe distance between yourselves approximately 1.5 meters apart, came the voice again, accompanied by the shuffling of candidates to comply. At this point, over 20 people, presumably invigilators, appeared. I wasn't sure what they were going to do. Starting now, all candidates must remain still and stand in place. Do not move at all. Maintain this position until you can no longer hold it. The last remaining 1,000 candidates will proceed to the next round. As soon as these words were spoken, the entire training ground erupted into a buzz as candidates started conversing. What kind of test is this? It's like being punished to stand. Damn, I've never heard of standing as an exam. What kind of academy is this? I wish I hadn't come all this way. I also thought, what an easy test just standing. Oh well, let's see. Quiet, candidates. This test assesses both physical endurance and willpower. Whether in martial studies or magic, good physical stamina and a strong will are essential. If any candidates are dissatisfied with the Academy's testing methods, you may withdraw at any time. Truly impressive, this magical broadcasting was amazing. After this declaration, not a single person chose to give up. After all, it would be quite embarrassing to withdraw without even showing one's strength. At the start, everyone felt relatively relaxed. Though it was summer, the morning was still quite cool. However, as time went on and the sun reached its zenith, the temperature on the training ground began to rise. Sweat trickled down my face. Although I didn't feel too uncomfortable, the heat was unpleasant. Fortunately, I was wearing light-colored warrior attire, otherwise, it would have been even harder. I stole glances at other candidates. They all seemed to be of high caliber. We had been standing for over 2 hours, and not a single person had quit. The invigilating teachers were divided into 2 shifts, each supervising for around an hour before switching off for rest. During this time, a female candidate made a slight move, which was immediately spotted by a middle-aged invigilator. He pointed at her and said, "You're out." They were really strict, even a slight movement was forbidden. Another 2 hours had passed, and as the sun descended, the temperature gradually dropped. However, enduring the scorching heat without food or water for a whole day had taken its toll. My stomach had long rebelled against my commands, and the sound of grumbling stomachs echoed across the training ground. Skipping a meal was bearable to some extent, but going without water after a day of sweating was making me uncomfortable. So far, more than 200 candidates had dropped out, not even reaching 1/10 of the initial number. How much longer did we need to stand here? Time seemed to crawl by, and it was a relief when evening finally arrived. A gentle breeze blew, bringing some comfort. Practicing the demonic heavenly art had become a habit every night. After all, whether I stood or practiced, it was better than doing nothing. Glancing left and right, I saw that almost all the candidates had their eyes closed, battling with their own bodies. I closed my eyes as well, quietly channeling the dark energy within me. The first stage of the demonic heavenly art wouldn't be visible from the outside during cultivation, so there was no need to worry about anyone detecting it. I sensed the surrounding dark elements continuously converging toward me, and the icy sensation traveled from my skin into my meridians. Following my energy pathway, it flowed slowly. It felt incredibly soothing, as if all the fatigue from the day had melted away. The cravings for food and water weren't as intense anymore. I continued to guide the demonic heavenly art through its fixed route, gradually focusing my mind until I entered a state of meditation. When I emerged from meditation, it was already morning. Aside from feeling somewhat thirsty, my body wasn't uncomfortable. I observed those around me. While not many had dropped out, all the candidates looked on the verge of collapsing. Their faces were pale. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. Noon arrived again. The weather was still fine, with the sun high in the sky. But for us candidates, this wasn't good news. Drawing from last night's experience, I quickly activated the dark energy. Though the effect of practicing the demonic heavenly art during the day was much weaker, it still brought a cooling sensation. Dealing with the heat was much easier today. In the afternoon, batches of candidates started withdrawing, and most of them needed to be carried out. As the sun gradually set, the clouds in the distant horizon became more beautiful under the evening sunlight. Dear candidates, you've worked hard. The first round of the exam is now over. Please take your number plates and register with the invigilating teachers. You can then rest and return the day after tomorrow for the second round of the exam. Only around 1,000 candidates were left after this elimination, and everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief. They plopped down on the ground. I was no exception. Although my stamina held up better than most, my limbs had stiffened from 2 days and 1 night of inactivity. I sat on the ground, gently moving my numb body. Attention, candidates. The invigilating teachers will now proceed to register each of you one by one. Please cooperate. As expected, around 10 invigilators dispersed to start registering the remaining candidates. Of course, I was the first. I handed over my number plate and said, "I'm number 1. The invigilator glanced at me and chuckled, "You're quite sturdy, young man." I just smiled in response. At that moment, a group of people wearing chef's uniforms appeared from somewhere. They carried trays covered with cloth and large buckets, as well as plates and bowls. Were they here to provide us with food? Indeed, a clear voice spoke up, "The Academy has prepared rice porridge and steamed buns for you. After finishing your meal, please rest as soon as possible." It was indeed food. Taking advantage of my position near the front, I rushed forward, seized a big bowl, scooped a bowl of rice porridge from a bucket, and eagerly slurped it down. It was so comfortable, unbelievably satisfying. I had never thought rice porridge could taste this good. While the others were still gathering around, I managed to gulp down 3 more bowls, then filled 1 more bowl and grabbed 3 steamed buns to enjoy on the side. With a satisfied stomach and improved energy, oh right, it had been 2 days already, and I hadn't fed Black Dragon yet. I needed to hurry back, it must be annoyed with me. Returning to the inn, I quickly got some fodder and headed to the stable. Black Dragon greeted me with a joyful neigh, using its large tongue to lick my face repeatedly. "You've suffered. Let's eat," I said, placing the high-quality fodder in front of it. After tending to Black Dragon, I was incredibly tired. I collapsed onto a pile of hay in the stable and fell asleep.